Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join this discussion. And by the way, you are the first guest of my initiative. Thank you. I would like to
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Okay. I would like to discuss with you the geopolitics of pandemic, if we can use this concept. So, and I would like to have your conceptualization of the geopolitics of pandemic.
Yes. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. And as I said, we can talk for about 18, 20 minutes. Yeah. You know, that's the time I've got allotted. At 10:20, I have to leave. Basically, here's how I see things. Crises put history on fast forward. They speed things up. And the coronavirus is speeding things up. Geopolitical developments that would normally take 5 years to play out, especially in countries that produce oil, which has gone down dramatically in price, such as Iran, Iraq, Venezuela, Nigeria, etc. Once the virus is over and people can gather in the streets again together, we're likely to see a lot of turbulence in a number of these countries, because the governments will have less money to bribe the population, to bribe people, because the oil money will be much less than it was before. So the coronavirus also, in a bigger sense, is making relations between the US and China and between the US and Russia worse than it was before. In other words, we're entering a more fractured world in geopolitics. You know, if you think about it, globalization was great from the end of the Cold War till a few years ago. You had middle classes emerged in places that never had them. You eradicated extreme poverty in many places. Everybody adapted American-style management techniques. Well, not everybody, but it became universal to an extent. You had this creation of the global elite, which was more loyal to each other than to their own countries, connected by technology the way we're connected. When the Berlin Wall fell, there were no iPhones, there was no Zoom, a lot of people didn't even have email addresses at the time. So the first part of globalization from the fall of the Berlin Wall to recently has basically been a good news story. It's been about the globe unifying. It may be superficially, maybe very sporadically and tenuously, but it's brought the globe together. However, we're now entering a bad news story of globalization. And the bad news story is that it's leading to fracture. No longer is the US and China and the US and Russia generally getting along. They were always rivals, but relations were predictable. They were gentlemanly like. They featured regular summit meetings, and but the key is they were predictable. Each side more or less knew what the other side would do to a certain extent, especially the US and China. The Russians were surprised by the US invasion of Iraq, by George W. Bush's pullout from that early, I think it was the ICBM treaty in the first year of his presidency. So there was some surprises, but generally it was okay. Now relations are unpredictable. They're tumultuous, and it will be because the US and China are competing militarily in the South and East China Sea. They're competing technologically with 5G networks. There is cyber conflict. There are cyber attacks from one country to another, Russia, US, China, US. Cyber has been a destabilizing element for great power relations because great powers are now in a hot cyber wars. It's just not bloody, but it is a war in the sense that there are constant attacks on each side. The Pentagon now has a new cyber command where it can theoretically launch retaliatory strikes against China and Russia. So cyber's been destabilizing. And beyond that, what you really have, it's emerged, it's morphed into an ideological conflict, because China itself has become more authoritarian, more one-man rule, more of a personality cult. China used to be dull for 30, 35 years after Mao. Collegial rule, very risk-averse, enlightened authoritarianism, and government by engineers. People, the leader had to retire at age 65. That's all gone now. So China has no friends left in Washington. That's key. The journalists, Congress, not just the White House, but for about 2 years already, Congress and the media have turned against China. All right, with Russia, the US media has turned dramatically against Russia. The elite media I'm talking about, the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc. Congress is very wary of Russia. And the Trump administration is what I call schizophrenic about Russia. Trump likes Putin, he likes Xi Jinping, he likes Putin, but his policies are much tougher than Obama's were, So Globalization 2.0, as I call it, is a bad news story for great power relations. And what that means, it's going to be harder for smaller countries to navigate between the US and Russia, between the US and China, because it's going to become harder to thread the needle, so to speak, to satisfy both sides. And I think this is a permanent development. Also, we're going to see you're going to see a separating out into spheres of influence, and we're already seeing it somewhat. I mean, Europe is the fight zone. I mean, Russia has been, mobilizing more and more force in Europe's northeastern border against, the Baltic states and Poland. China's been making deep inroads into the economies of Southern Europe. Russia and the U.S. are in this fight over the second Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And Europe's kind of caught in the middle. Europe does badly, really badly in this situation. Europe loves globalization. It loves good superpower relations, so it can apply its rule of law to everyone equally, so to speak. But it's becoming much, much harder for Europe to do so. And then you have, I didn't mention Turkey. Turkey's got a terrible currency crisis. They may have to put in capital controls. Turkey may be a good news story in the middle term, 10 years from now or something like that. But in the very, very near term, it's going to be, I think Erdogan is going to become more erratic, because he's going to face more and more domestic turmoil because of the way the economy has been mismanaged. So Turkey has become a force of instability, The Turks have been tied up in Syria, and all of that. But it's unclear where Turkey goes from here, because although Turkey has it has institutions, it has a democratic system, Erdogan has sort of whittled away at that. He's chipped away at those institutions. So it's unclear how he leaves power, how he, it's hard to imagine a soft landing for him if things keep getting worse economically in Turkey.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert, for comprehensive explanation of the geopolitics of the pandemic. Now, so you mentioned about the relations between China and Russia, and now in the media, different politicians, academics, so they raffle the idea that in near future, so the pandemic will change the power of balance. Will be shifted from west to the east, or from US to China. And when I when I pronounce this sentence, this idea, two questions are coming to my mind. The first one, can the West still win? And as Kishore Mabubani would ask, has China already won?
No, I don't think China's already won. Here's why. With all of I think ultimately states, great states and small states are strong or weak depending upon their internal structures. And the internal structures of the US, even with all the craziness of Trump, are still very strong. Institutions are still strong. In this coronavirus crisis, you've seen the emergence of great governors of individual states like New York and California, et cetera. You still have a separation of federal, of judicial, parliamentary, and executive. Trump has weakened at the edges institutions, but they're still very firm. The U.S. is energy self-sufficient, and oil and gas will come back in price. The Russians cannot kill the shale gas revolution in the U.S. The shale gas revolution can go into hibernation, but it's not going to be killed because it is no one big government producer. It's lots of small-time capitalist, extremely innovative producers who will manage, and the weak may go under, but the stronger ones will survive. So you have self-sufficient energy, you have strong institutions, you have no borders. I mean, two oceans and a Canadian middle class to the north. The Mexican border obsesses American politics, but it's really not a difficult border in the larger scheme of things. If you look at Russia's borders, if you look at China's borders, if you look at the fact that China will be a net importer of hydrocarbons for years to come, and then if you look at the Russian system is weak institutionally. If Vladimir Putin were to get very ill, for instance, it's unclear how Russia would be governed. China's stronger. China has stronger institutions, but it's still not as strong as the US. China is building a great middle class, and middle classes are very ungrateful. They don't thank the politicians for making them middle class. Middle classes just have more demands, more anger. They hold government to a higher standard, so to speak. So I see a lot of internal turbulence in Russia and China's future over the next 10 years. I think the U.S. is comparatively well off. I mean, the thing is, all great powers are weakening in a sense. But the U.S. is weakening at a slower pace, as I would put it. I think we're going to see more turbulence in the world over the next 10 or 15 years.
Okay, thank you. What about the small states? You mentioned about the small states. See, and Armenia. Armenia is one of the small states of the post-Soviet space, and Armenia is the only post-Soviet small state, which is a member of the Eurasian Economic Union and simultaneously has signed enhanced and comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement with the European Union. So, if something this pandemic change in the geopolitical patterns of Eurasia, Armenia as a small state, how should Armenia behave in the new geopolitical puzzle?
Yeah, Armenia is surrounded by historic enemies to the west and to the east. With Iran, relations are complicated, we should say. They're just complicated. And Iran itself may not be very stable over the next 5 years or so. I mean, because Iran is facing a perfect storm. It's badly handled coronavirus, oil and gas prices are going down. The government is hated by its own people, to a large extent. So Iran has no choice. I mean, Armenia has no choice but to do more of what it's doing, which is to get along with the West and the US, but also with Russia, because Russia is just too strong to be ignored, and Russia is close. Europe is further away, and the US is half a world away. so to speak. So Armenia has no choice but to balance, kind of. It doesn't have the oil and gas of Azerbaijan, which gives it a kind of leverage. So it's and it's landlocked. So the result is it's all about diplomacy. It's all about really. Armenia has no room for mistakes. A country like the U.S. can invade Iraq, a big mistake, and the U.S. is still there. It's still strong. It still has a good future. Israel is like Armenia. It's small. It can't make mistakes, so to speak, geopolitically. So it's got to, so Armenia is about the ultimate realist kind of, point of view. I know it can only do so much with military. It can strengthen its military. It can have niche capacities in certain elements. It could smartly spend on military, but that's only going to get it so far. It's really about building up friendship and relationships with Russia, with the European Union, and with the U.S. and the Armenian diaspora, which has been very well developed for decades.
Yeah, and especially after revolution, if you know, in 2018, we did a velvet revolution, non-violent velvet revolution, and the regime which ruled in Armenia for decades and concentrated political and economic power in their hands. So people took to the streets, and a new government, new parliament came in power, and this new government say that we should focus our foreign policy on the principle of the balanced relations, both with Iran, with US, with European Union, with Russia.
Right. Yeah.
We should center on the pan-Armenianness, and our sovereignty should be stressed out.
Yeah, and also the key thing here is, and I mentioned this with Romanians too, is the more that you could defeat corruption, the stronger the state will be. Because the less corrupt the state is, the more people want to invest in it. The more they feel comfortable investing in it and taking risks. And that builds up like a strength in and of itself. That was the great success of Singapore. It was a clean country. Anyone felt safe investing there, and Singapore became a place just bursting with multinationals, and that made it secure in a security sense.
Yeah, and the last question. So,
sure.
When recently, during one of his visits of our Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, when he visited Iran, during that visit, a very ambitious project was discussed to connect the Persian Gulf with the Black Sea. And Armenia is considered as a corridor, which can be a bridge. So do you see any chance Armenia can play geopolitically, if we think geopolitically, can play in this new geopolitical puzzle? So to connect the regional power with the other region, or
absolutely
economies of Eurasia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just like Georgia has been a connector for oil and for, I think, oil. I'm not, between Azerbaijan and the Black Sea and Turkey. Transit countries can do very well. And the idea of a Black Sea, Persian Gulf, or Black Sea, Indian Ocean even, kind of, energy corridor makes perfect sense. I say Indian Ocean because Iran has ports on the Indian Ocean outside of the Persian Gulf, etc. So no, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, thank you for
my pleasure.
Discussion.
My pleasure.
It was my pleasure to have a conversation with you.